Hey guys, it's ETA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the JXD Mini Arcade system. Now I wasn't planning on picking one of these up, but it was in my feed on Amazon. It was on a flash sale for $40, so I figured I'd go ahead and take a look at it. Now in the past I have taken a look at another very similar machine, but that was powered by a MIPS CPU, the same kind of thing that comes in the LDK game or the new RG350, and if you're familiar with those devices, they're pretty underpowered. So while this was on the way, I started doing some research online to see what chip this is powered by. It is an ARM chip, but there's some conflicting information. In most of the listings that I see for this, it says that it has a dual-core CPU with 512 megabytes of RAM, but the user manual states that it has a quad-core CPU with 256 megabytes of RAM. And judging by the performance that I'm getting out of this, I wouldn't doubt that it is running a quad-core CPU, possibly an all-winner or a Rockchip SoC. It also has a 4.3-inch IPS display, a 2000 mAh 18650 battery, and this particular model did come with two USB controllers. They're not the greatest, but they do work. The one I have here is branded by JXD, but I've seen some other companies with branding on these same exact units, but in the user manual, it's known as the Q50 Mini Game Console. We have Start Select, A, B, X, Y, L, R, and we also have volume control up here on the front. So there's a total of 10 buttons and an analog stick. Moving around back, we have a 1.5-inch 3-watt speaker, and this thing gets really loud. It actually sounds pretty decent. HDMI output, two USB 2.0 ports, 3.5mm audio jack, SD card slot, micro USB for charging and powering the unit. Yes, this is portable, and our power switch. I'll go ahead and power the unit on. It does have that 4.3-inch IPS display, and it actually looks really good here. I was surprised by how nice the screen is on this unit. So it boots up really fast, and initially I was under the impression that this was going to be running some type of Android operating system, but it's not. This is running its own custom Linux firmware here, and hopefully somebody down the road can make this look a little better because I do not like the interface on this thing. It's very basic, but don't get me wrong, it works well for what we have here. Before we get into some performance testing, I did want to pull this thing apart and just see what we're working with here. All the information that I can find on this unit leads me to believe that we have a quad-core Cortex A7 ARM CPU with 256 megabytes of RAM. So I'm thinking that it's powered by a low-end Rockchip or all-winner SoC. And if that's the case, we should have pretty good performance with FBA, NeoGeo, NES, SNES, Mega Drive, Game Gear, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and even PS1 emulation. But when I got right down to it, the markings on the CPU didn't help whatsoever. I searched and searched online for the CPU make and model, but it's only listed as a GB2 here. That's all we have. I also ran the numbers and nothing came back in any of my searches, so if you guys have any idea, just let me know in the comments below. A lot of the times, these companies will rebrand the CPUs for some odd reason. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to take a look at the interface first. Like I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of it, but we do have some box art here for at least the CPS games. From the main menu, you'll have access to about 12 different games, but there is a games sub-menu located at the very bottom here, which contains a ton of different games. This does come with a 32 gigabyte SD card, and you can add your own games if you'd like to. So at the very bottom here, we have some more choices. We have music, image viewer, video player, and finally, we have our settings menu. You can change the theme style. There's only two to choose from. It just puts up a background. I'm going to leave it at the stock blue background. Off-screen settings. We also have backlight settings. There's 4 different levels. You can change the key tone. There's 5 to choose from, or you could mute it. Restore default settings and system information. GB2 Retro Game. That's what it's known as. And I think if you get one of these, you're going to be stuck on this firmware unless somebody else creates some kind of custom firmware for it. I don't think the company's going to be releasing an update for this. That's pretty much how it goes with these cheaper Chinese consoles. Moving back to the bottom, under the game section, we have CPS, Famicom, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, Game Boy, Mega Drive, PlayStation 1, and Super Famicom, otherwise known as SNES. Now I have tried to load up some CPS 3 games, but I can't get anything to load. Only CPS 1 and 2 work on this unit. So let's get right into some testing. First up, we're going to do Marvel vs. Street Fighter. Keep in mind that you can also use the included USB controllers if you don't like this analog stick. So pressing the select button will insert your coins for these arcade games. And let's see how this thing performs. It definitely handles these CPS games really well, and I gotta say that the analog stick is working better than I thought it would. I just wish it didn't have so much throw on it. I'm wondering if there's some way to add some type of restriction here so you don't have so much throw on this thing, but other than that, it's actually working much better than I thought it would. I wish it was a real gated joystick, but that's not what we have here. So in order to exit or access the save menu, you can press start and select. We do have save slots here, so we can save the game and reload. We can also change the control scheme and exit the game. I personally haven't found a game list for this. They do claim there's 9,000 games preloaded here, and I wouldn't doubt it at all. I mean, with everything that they have here. They definitely have all the CPS 1 and CPS 2 games listed, but I want to go ahead and try Game Boy Advance, so we'll get right into that. So here's Sonic Advance for Game Boy Advance. This is just a fast-paced game, that's why I wanted to test it here. I didn't see Sonic Advance 2 or 3 listed, but you can always add it if you want to. So far so good. I haven't noticed any stuttering or anything like that, but I do notice a flash on the screen every once in a while. It'll either be on the left or the right when I get a power up. It only happens for about a single frame, and I'm not sure if you're going to see it in this video, but that's just something to keep in mind. Moving over to Sega Genesis, otherwise known as Mega Drive in other parts of the world, we have Altered Beast. Given the performance I was getting with Game Boy Advance, I was pretty sure we were going to handle Mega Drive just fine. SNES, NES, Game Boy Color is going to be no problem for this system here. But the main system I really wanted to test here, which I know a lot of people will be interested in, is PS1. And I'm going to be doing this on an HDMI screen. And HDMI Out on this thing actually looks really good. I've tested systems in the past with HDMI Out, but it looked horrible. This is super clean. And the sound will now be routed through the speakers on the monitor I'm using. This is just a portable 15.6-inch monitor. I'm using one of the included USB controllers. And by the way, this is still all on battery power. Now there was only one PS game loaded on here, and that was Tekken 3. The games need to be .img, but if you're using bin and Q, just rename the bin file img and it'll work fine. There's one game that I loaded up on here and I just can't get it to load correctly, which is Gran Turismo 2. I think it comes down to the ROM I'm using, but everything else works fine that I added. So PlayStation 1 performance on this machine is looking really good here. I'm actually very surprised by this. This is the NTSC version of Tekken 3, so we should be running at 60 FPS. I'm sure there's a few frame dips here and there, but overall performance is great, at least with Tekken 3 here. If you press start and select on the controller, it'll bring up the menu. We can save and load from here, and there is a disc swap option, so if you have a multi-disc game, you can load the next disc. So Tekken 3 is looking pretty good. Let's move over to another one. So Tony Hawk Underground 2 seems to be running quite well here. I'm very surprised that this little machine is able to handle these PS1 games so well. It's got to come down to being an ARM chip instead of that MIPIS CPU. And finally, at least for this video, we have Bloody Roar 2. This is one of my go-to tests. This is a harder one to emulate on lower end systems, and while I do notice some frame dips every once in a while, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. In the past, I've tested this game on a lot of these cheaper, low-end ARM chips, and I've had trouble running it. Usually on the really cheap chips, it runs at about 53 FPS, but we're on up there. We're almost at 60, I'd say around 58, and it does drop down every once in a while. But like I mentioned, this is a harder one to emulate, and this little system is handling it quite well. So in the end, I'm personally really impressed with the performance here out of everything that I tested, even PS1 emulation. I personally don't like the menu interface, and this analog stick definitely has too much throw on it. But these have come a long way in the last year and a half. These little mini arcades have been upgraded quite a bit. I really do think this is well worth $35 to $40, but at the regular price of $70, I would stay away from it. Amazon did have a flash sale on these for $39.99, and that's the only reason I picked it up, but I have seen these on third-party sites like Banggood for $35 to $45. So if you've been thinking about picking one of these up and you can get it for a good deal, I think it's worth it. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I really appreciate you watching. If you come across any new firmware for this unit, please let me know and I'll go ahead and flash it. And if you have any information on this CPU, I'd like to know. If it truly is a quad core, I'm thinking it's an Allwinner H3. If it's the dual core, I'm thinking it's the Allwinner A12. Either way, performance is pretty good for what this thing is. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. It'd also be really cool if you could hit that like button or maybe subscribe to the channel. But like always, thanks for watching.